Good morning, I'm Marty Cady. I'm the Deputy Managing Editor of Politico. Thanks everyone for joining us for our pro-energy deep dive, the energy sector and implications of tax policy. And thanks everyone for joining us on the live stream. We're excited to be hosting this event and look forward to an engaging conversation. Today we have a great group of leaders in the energy and tax space joining us. On the first panel we have Congressman Mike Pompeo, member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Joining him will be Senator Debbie Stabenow, who is Chairwoman of the Finance Subcommittee on Energy, Natural Resources, and Infrastructure, and of course, Chairwoman of the Senate Agriculture Committee. On our second panel, which will immediately follow, will include Kevin Book, Managing Director of Research for ClearView Energy Partners, LLC, Richard Caperton, who is Managing Director for Energy for the Center for American Progress, Dorothy Coleman, Vice President of the National Association of Manufacturers, Steve Ellis, Vice President of Taxpayers for Common Sense, Steve Nadel, Executive Director for the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, and Malcolm Woolf, Senior Vice President for Policy and Government Affairs for Advanced Energy Economy. It's going to be a great panel, and we're looking forward to the conversation. Before we get started here on stage, I'd like to thank the American Petroleum Institute for their partnership with us on this event. And here to say a few words from API is Mr. Jack Gerard, President and CEO.
Well, thank you, Marty. Let me just say, I just want to give a brief welcome to everybody who's here. We're grateful you'd come. This is a timely topic, as you know. We're grateful to Politico for putting this together and to encourage this sort of debate. It's our view that the more robust the debate, the better the public policy is as an outcome of the dialogue, and energy is front and center today. Let me share just one quick thought with you. I was in New York yesterday, participated on a panel, and the preceding speaker, who's a global energy economist, made a very important comment. He said, we're at a time of unprecedented uncertainty in the energy dynamic on a global scale. But as we followed up on that, I suggested we're really at an unprecedented opportunity as it relates to energy, particularly here in the United States. And when you look at it from our vantage point, from our sector in the oil and gas space, we're now the world's #1 producer of natural gas, and some have suggested we can become #1 producer of oil in 7 short years. So when you look at energy policy and you look at tax policy, they're very important to this broader dynamic and what we do as a nation and how we move forward. Our industry contributes $85 million a day to government coffers to support the activities that take place, provide the services and other things that our constituents require. So we're grateful to Politico today and for the other panelists who will be here as part of this. We're hopeful as the debate goes on that we'll take some of the uncertainty out of the debate and find ways to move forward as a nation to get this beyond perceived partisanship and truly find mutual agreement or common ground where we can move the nation forward. So Marty, thank you very much, and thanks to panelists, and please enjoy.
And thank you, API, for your partnership and for making this event possible. A couple of other things. Don't forget to tweet your questions to #ProDDEnergy. That's #ProDDEnergy. Our moderators will actually be tracking what you tweet here on a tablet on the stage, and we'll be streaming the Twitter conversation on monitors on both sides of the stage, as you can see. Now, without further delay, I'd like to welcome Darren Samuelson, the Senior Policy Reporter for Politico Pro, and Steve Sloan, Politico's Senior Tax Reporter, to the stage for our first panel.
Never mind.
Where would you like us?
I think you are right here.
Okay, great. Great. Morning.
Put your cup if you want right here.
Oh, good. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Darren Samuelson, and I am Politico's Senior Policy Reporter.
I'm Stephen Sloan. I'm our Senior Tax Reporter. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and thanks to our panelists, Senator Debbie Stabenow, Democrat of Michigan, and Congressman Mike Pompeo, Republican from Kansas. And thought we could start this morning the conversation on energy taxation with a little bit of the news from yesterday, this announcement that, that Senate Finance Committee Chairman Max Baucus is going to retire at the end of his current term. And so I want to get a sense what this means for tax reform and for where you think that this how you think that impacts the tax reform debate. And Senator Stabenow, we'll start with you.
Well, first of all, I regret that he's decided to retire. He has been an incredible force in the Senate in so many ways, not just on taxes, but he serves with me on the Agriculture Committee and is a strong voice for Montana there, certainly. I think that he is very committed to getting tax reform done, if at all possible, before he leaves. And I know he and Chairman Camp from Michigan are working very closely together. I think it's a tough road because of where we start, very different philosophies, but we are every week now doing work sessions on a bipartisan basis on different parts of the tax code. In fact, this week is on energy tax issues. Right. And looking for common ground. There is a lot of common ground in a number of areas. So we'll just have to see. I honestly think that in the Senate that we can get a tax reform bill, and a congressman can say what he thinks can happen in the House, but I think we can get something that is bipartisan in the Senate.
Do you think that Senator Baucus's departure as a lame duck makes it harder, though, for him to get something done, or do you think he's going to be more motivated actually to push the ball? I
think he's more motivated. I really do. I think he's going to double down on wanting to do this. Talking with him yesterday at lunch and when he spoke in front of our caucus about leaving, I mean, first of all, he reminded us, as all our colleagues are, that it's still 2 years, almost 2 years, and so he wants to be focused rather than out campaigning. He wants to be focused on this issue, which he is incredibly dedicated to. So I would not underestimate either the chairman or all of us in the ability to get something done.
Was it a shock to see Senator Baucus make
it? It was
happen?
surprising. It was surprising. He had been moving forward, and but there's so many. This is a complicated time, and I think for him, he decided that he would like to take a different direction at the end of the term, and we certainly understand and respect that.
Congressman, what's your read of this from the House side? Do you have a view as to what this means for tax reform?
No, I don't have any sense of what the senator's departure has. I mean, Representative Camp from Michigan's working hard. He very much wants to get this done. He's got a big group of us working with him, trying to help put pieces of that in place. He's doing a lot of outreach to a lot of our members. I mean, laying the foundation, all the groundwork that has to be done to get something like this done. Is proceeding, and I expect we'll continue to move forward. I will say, I think there was a step backwards in the House when the president said that tax reform wouldn't be revenue neutral. Right, that's been right. We've done it twice in my lifetime, and every time it was revenue neutral. That was the agreement. We wanted less revenue. Other folks wanted more. And when the president said he didn't want it to be revenue neutral, I understand he said a couple different things now, but. Tax reform is going to have to be revenue neutral for it to have an opportunity to be successful in the House of Representatives.
And let me just add two things. One, the good news, I think, on tax reform is that Chairman Camp and Chairman Baucus have put together what is a very similar process, which is great. On revenue neutral, let me just say that when it was done before, we didn't have the largest deficit in the history of the country. And so we've got to balance out how we address not only spending in the domestic side, but what I would view as unnecessary spending in the tax side. And so somehow we're going to have to balance doing something that will help us bring down the debt, but also deals in some way revenue neutral on some things, but we're going to have to figure out a way to pay down this debt.
When we look at energy tax issues in the overall scope of tax reform, how much harder is it to figure out how to deal with energy issues in the tax code than it is to deal with all the other issues that you have to deal with in a tax reform? Is energy harder, less complicated? Can you give us a sense?
Yeah, I don't have any sense. I mean, it's complex. There's no doubt. I mean, tax policy impacts our energy markets dramatically. We have tinkered with the tax code hundreds of times to try and benefit one particular energy industry or another. My judgment was we ought to rid ourselves of each of them, but it's complicated. But it impacts energy companies in terms of their ability to raise capital and bring it to the United States, their capacity to build out the infrastructure we need to continue the American energy renaissance. All of those things are dramatically impacted by the Internal Revenue Code. And so there's a lot of complexity to be unpacked as part of energy inside that tax reform process.
You know, I think this is where we have very different views on how to proceed in terms of energy. I'm sure we both agree that this is a national security issue as well as an economic issue. But because this is of strategic, economic, and national security interest to us in terms of energy independence, jobs in the economy, as well as focusing on what's happening in the environment, we have, I believe, a stake in partnering with the private sector in a broader way than we have done in terms of energy security. It's interesting. If every other form of energy had had the tax preference of oil, which started in 1916, it's not renewed every year. Nobody's got to worry about a tax extender. It's been 100 years. In the last 30 years alone, $100 billion plus that's been invested. Again, certainty, right, in the marketplace. It's embedded in the tax code. If we had done that for a wide variety of energy sources, I think we'd have a very different look. Coming from Michigan, an industrial state, there's no question I would have supported what was done early on. It was part of our industrialization. It was important to do. We now have a sector that has not only benefited from it, but has the most profitable countries in the world. That's great. The question is now, though, in being economically independent and competing in a global economy where China is spending $178 million a day to beat us on clean energy technologies right now. We don't want to go from foreign dependence on oil to foreign dependence on electric batteries or wind or solar. So when our companies are competing with countries in an area that's so critical for us, from natural gas expansion to wind, which is the fastest growing sector, to solar, which is moving to whatever it is, from a tax standpoint, and I chair the subcommittee in finance on energy, what I want to see is the opportunity for a longer term policy. Wouldn't it be, my judgment, it'd be hard to get there, but if we could do a 10-year policy on wind and solar and geothermal and other areas to give them a chance to fully mature and develop, I think that would be in our national interest to do that. And I also have to remind folks that everybody talks about using energy. For me, it's about making energy. There's 8,000 parts in one of those big wind turbines, and we can make every one of those in Michigan. So for me, this is about manufacturing. It's about the opportunity to create jobs through parts and processes and so on. And so I feel we have a stake in partnering on this. And as long as every other country in the world is trying to beat us and our companies are competing with countries, I think our tax policy has got to reflect our ability to understand that this is a national security as well as an economic.
I'm sure you want to ask a question, but I disagree with just about everything.
This is where it gets interesting.
That's why we brought you here.
Look, so where to begin? So there's this idea that these oil companies have had decades of subsidies. I'd love somebody to show them to me. I mean, we're talking about what I imagine the senator's referring to is what the president, when he talks about big oil, he's thinking about depletion in IDCs. First of all, the big companies don't get them. The biggest companies have not received most of these benefits for a very, very long time, the integrateds. Second, these are depreciation schedules, right? The IDCs are a depreciation schedule. It's just a question of how quickly one can expense it. And we can argue about what the right time period for that expensing is. But this isn't a tax credit. It's not a handout. There's no cash check. It's just a matter of saying you had a cost of doing business, and we don't tax on revenue in this country. We tax on profits. And so this is just an expense. And then the last piece is, there was reference to the wind PTC and some others. These are horrible tax policy and horrible energy policy. And indeed, when you listen to Chairman Camp, he talks about getting rid of loopholes and special interest deductions and lowering the rate. What better place to start than in a tax code that is riddled with preferences for just about every little fancy energy source that someone has dreamed up? Right, these are energy sources that have political patrons, not customers. Right? Folks can't afford these things. In Kansas, people like affordable energy. When they turn on their air conditioning, they'd like to be able to pay Westar. And as you build up these mandates, whether it's the RFS or a particular tax preference, whatever place it is, you are selecting an energy source that consumer would not have chosen if they were going to do it, because what they want to know is it's going to be cool in their home in August when it's 106 and windy in Wichita, and that the bill that comes isn't going to have 4 digits to the left of the decimal place. That's what they want to know. And you can do that. You can have clean air, you can have safe drinking water, and do all of that without trying to pick winners and losers in these markets.
Let me just stress one more time, we've been picking winners for almost 100 years.
I
It's
just
not just depreciation
disagree with that. I
schedules,
just disagree with that
It's production tax credits. And right now, if it's not a problem, then why, when we want to eliminate the $4 billion a year just to the top 5 companies, is there such a fight about that? I mean, I'm fine with the smaller companies that are involved, you know, in all of our states in terms of developing oil and gas and so on, but the 5 top companies that are the wealthiest in the world, and that's fine, that's great, but taxpayers shouldn't still be subsidizing them. That makes absolutely no sense. So you're right, we've got some special deals in the tax code, and I would argue the specialist, the biggest, you know, in terms of the folks that don't need taxpayer help, are the folks that are doing incredibly well, and taxpayers want a choice. The people want a choice at a pump. We're seeing people move to alternatives because we actually finally are giving them some choices in terms of vehicles and some choices in terms of other options. So, and the final thing I would say, this really is a national security issue for us, because we are in a position now where our president, because we have more domestic production, we have less foreign production. When he goes abroad, he can look those guys in the eye, and he doesn't have to be as worried about what's going to happen in terms of national security. Wouldn't that be great if, because of an all-in approach, which I support, doing everything, but fairly, giving everybody the same tax preference. If we're going to have production tax credits and so on, and for oil, let's do it for wind, let's do it for solar, let's do it, you know, let's do geothermal, let's lay it out, natural gas, everything, lay it out, and then give everybody a 10-year tax policy and let them go. But understand, somebody else got a 100-year start.
I'd only say this, it may well be that we've subsidized industries in the past. I've only been here 27 months. Can't make up for the sins of what's behind us. It's time to move forward. It's literally time to allow all these companies to go compete, whether that's wind or solar. I love them all. They're great. They're talented engineers. Let's go. Let's let them go compete. I am confident they'll figure out a way to do it. What they don't need is somebody else's money to do that.
So what do you envision as we get to the end of the year, which, you know, the year is kind of moving by quickly here, and a lot of these provisions will expire. We do this dance every December here about with this extenders package. I know a lot depends on tax reform, but you know, assuming that we don't have a tax reform bill, you know, signed into law by that point, what do you see happening to these temporary provisions?
Let me answer that first. We got rid of the wind production tax credit. I worked really hard on it. We got rid of it for 23 hours. Crowning achievement in my time here in Congress so far. And then in the Senate, they stuck it back in the dark of night. They stuck in a huge,
It was a bright light in the room. It was not. It was not.
And so be it. So my guess is that's where we'll end up again this time. But I promise you, I'll work a little bit harder at 11:30 p.m. on New Year's than I did this past year. It's just it's unfortunate, right? Let's bring it through committee. Let's see if there's enough votes for these things. I think most members. I come from a wind state, just in case anybody's counting, right? We have some of the largest wind development places. We've got wind turbine manufacturing just right on the doorstep. We've got lots of employees hired there. I love them. It's a great company. I wish them all well. But this is in one breath. They'll tell you this is an industry that's got lots of jobs, and and then next they'll say we're an infant startup needing desperate help from the federal government. And you can't have it both ways. You can't be important to the American economy and also be an infant in need of assistance. And so I know they can compete. I know they'll get there. Just go do it.
Well, in terms of the end of the year, let me go back and first say they are infant compared to 100 years of investment in oil. So let's just keep going back. I wasn't here in 1960 either, but you know, that's when it started. And so we made a policy decision to pick a winner. We picked a winner. They won. And they've been doing great. And that's great. Now we have the opportunity in a global economy where everybody else is racing to clean energy technologies to win again. and to add more consumer options. By the way, Michigan is now #1 in clean energy patents. I just want to get that out there. We're very excited about that. But the truth is, and here's what will happen at the end of the year. I'm going to fight like crazy for that production tax credit. In the light of day, in the dark of night, wherever it takes us, we will be fighting because, again, you know what we won't be debating? Extending the oil subsidies, because they're extended automatically. We don't have to worry about extenders. But the only thing we have to worry about extenders is everything else that wants to compete with them. So, you know, whether it's biodiesel, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether, you know, other supports, in my judgment, this is not a level playing field right now. And so what I'd like to see, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, to put something in place so that people have some economic certainty to invest. And then we can phase things out, phase everything out. But right now, this is not a level playing field, and China is spending $178 million every single day. And that doesn't count Germany's manufacturing incentives that they do that are, you know, where we're being pushed constantly in terms of losing jobs. I don't want those jobs or that energy going away when it can be here. The innovation is being created here. The technology is here. We want the jobs here.
Time is quickly running away from us here. But let me ask you, I mean, listening, you're on the far sides of the equation here. We started this conversation sort of talking about the prospects for tax reform and Senator Baucus leaving and
Right.
Chairman Camp also lame ducked. I mean, you're pretty far apart. I mean, that's pretty emblematic of where this debate is right now. I know the House and the Senate are talking, the Democrats and Republicans are talking. I mean, is there anything that you can see coming together and reaching some sort of an agreement this year or the next 2 years, given sort of how far apart the two of you are and how far apart the Democrats and Republicans are right now?
You know, I don't know. I hope so. I know that in the Senate, the position that I have just been saying is actually one supported by Democrats and Republicans. We have the production tax credit for wind has been led by Republicans in the Senate. And so around energy, there's a broader or different view that is a bipartisan view. I'm not sure. I hope we can do that. I do believe in a global economy. We have to do tax reform. We have to make sure our companies can compete. And we have to be strategic about what is in our national interest and our economic interest, which is why I think energy is so critical. But there are other areas where we agree that we should be simplifying the code, absolutely. So I don't know. I know that there are people of goodwill that want to get to something. It would be a shame if we continue to be the extenders Congress, because as long as I've been here, that's what we do.
We'll give you the last word here, Congressman.
You know, I don't know. I can't answer that. It is the case that a lot of these things, it's not D's versus R's. There's Republicans who think the wind production tax credit's a good idea. There's Democrats who don't. I mean, so it's not purely a partisan set of issues. And so I think there's space. I just think if you're serious about tax reform, if the mantra is close loopholes, lower rates, and that's what I hear both sides saying, the energy sector is a really wonderful place to begin to do that.
Okay, it looks like it's time to wrap up the conversation this morning. It just took a couple of questions to get you guys going. Senator Stabenow, Congressman Pompeo, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so.
And we'll just give it 1 second here while we wait for our next panel to come on stage. Thank you. See.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks. We got a big panel here for our second panel, so I'm looking forward to a good discussion. I'll quickly introduce everyone. Steve Nadel, the Executive Director of the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. Kevin Book, the Managing Director of Research down there. We've got Richard Caperton, the Managing Director of Energy at the Center for American Progress. Dorothy Coleman, the Vice President of Tax and Domestic Economic Policy at the National Association of Manufacturers. Steve Ellis, the Vice President of Taxpayers for Common Sense, and Malcolm Woolf, the Senior Vice President for Policy and Government Affairs at Advanced Energy Economy. Thanks to everyone for joining us this morning. I think a good place to start off might be where Congressman Pompeo left us, saying that if tax reform is about lowering rates, broadening the base, the energy sector is a good place to start. So, do you guys agree? Dorothy,
maybe I'll
start?
start. I don't think necessarily so. I think when we look at tax reform, the things that the NAM wants a tax climate that makes the United States the best place in the world to manufacture, and also the best place to attract foreign direct investment. And certainly we need an environment, we need a tax climate that encourages necessary capital investment. And certainly in the energy area, the investments that the energy sector has made in recent years has really been a game changer for not only the energy industry, but for manufacturing and for the broader economy in the United States. And we need to continue that. We have an advantage in the energy sector right now, and we need to build on it if we really want to be the best we can in the world. And that's certainly where the NAM is on that.
We would differ at Taxpayers for Common Sense. I mean, we want to lower the rates, broaden the base, and so whether you start at the energy sector, you start in a different area or whatever, you're going to have to come back to the energy sector. I mean, there are too many provisions that have littered the code that we should be trying to eliminate. Right now, we've provided subsidies and accelerated depreciation and things like that for the oil and gas. We've provided production tax credits. We've provided all this that are actually working at cross purposes. And so we don't really know what the baseline is in the energy sector. And so from our perspective, it'd be better to even if it's just a mental exercise, to start with a zero-based tax code. To essentially, let's take it all out, let's lower the rates to whatever it is, and then people can argue to add it back in, these various provisions, and then we'll slowly increase the rates. But we think this has got to be on the table, and that we should be working to trying to eliminate all of these various provisions that have either been embedded in the code since before the '86 reform or have been added to the code since the '86 reform.
Keep going down this way, and then we'll circle back. So, Malcolm.
I certainly think that there's an important role for energy tax reform now. This is a great opportunity for us to be looking at this from a fresh perspective. From where the advanced energy economy views it, we need to look at what are our goals. If we want affordable, secure, clean power, is the tax code, the way it's structured now, the best way to get there? And I think there's a much more effective way to achieve our goals than the antiquated patchwork system we've got. We've got to think about what are our market-based goals, how do we get there, let things sunset when you've reached market-based objectives, and do it from a technology-neutral way. So we try to solve broad solutions rather than pick particular technological solutions. But it would be a terrible missed opportunity if we simply tried to throw everything out. There's a critical federal role for supporting this strategic resource. And we can't simply think that the federal government has no role to play.
Yes, I also think that if we're going to be doing tax reform, we're going to have to cut from a lot of different places. Not just going to be the energy sector, this sector, that sector. Everyone's going to have to take a haircut. And I agree with the previous commenters that we're really going to have to look at what we're now encouraging, because there's a fair amount of places where we're basically encouraging what we call free riders, people who would have done the same thing anyway. I work in energy efficiency. 85% of the windows qualify for tax incentives. That's too much. You need to just encourage the most efficient. The previous panel talked about oil and gas and how much would have this happened anyway. We need to take the limited money that's available for tax incentives and really focus it on those things that we're really trying to encourage rather than just business as usual.
Let's kind of flip it around. Richard, let me hear from you, and then we'll end with Kevin.
So let's step back from energy just a little bit and think about what we want the tax code to do. The tax code is intended to raise money for the government, to provide the services that we need the government to provide. We need to increase revenue, and the way to do that in the energy space is through a carbon tax and also through eliminating the wasteful tax expenditures that we've already heard a lot about. Now, at the same time, there are reasons that we can use the tax code to invest in the American economy. Energy is a good place to invest, and we can do that through targeted smart investments that are included in the tax code, like the production tax credit. So I think that there's a lot of things that you can do in energy tax reform in the context of broader tax reform, and that Congress should do.
Kevin, game this out for us. I know you often kind of try and map out how strategy is going to work out on the Hill. You've got Senator Baucus stepping down. You've got Chairman Camp also with term limits expired. Do you see this all kind of coming together into something, or are we probably headed for a year-end race to extend things or not extend things?
Well, if I get to talk about predictions, I'll also want to offer an opinion. Our prediction is that the race is going to probably conclude sometime in 2015 after the midterm election cycle, in spite of best intentions, but a lot of the decisions are going to be made now. The attractiveness of the role at the helm of the Finance Committee in the Senate may be diminished somewhat by most of those decisions being made. But, since Richard took a step back, let me step further back at risk of framing this too broadly. What if the dream didn't come true? How many articles have we read about energy independence? How many articles have we read about the idea that we're reaching self-sufficiency? That's great, but it hasn't happened yet. As we seek tax reform, we have this opportunity to become an energy superpower, not just our domestic self-sufficiency, but also the export of our knowledge and innovation to other countries that want us there, but competing with their own state-owned enterprises. Too many changes and that dream doesn't come true, and it's all still theoretical and still on paper. The molecules are still in the ground without trillions of dollars of capital investment. And so I think that you want to be moving carefully. People want to talk in big numbers because big numbers are the goals here, but small changes can have dramatic effects throughout the energy investment sphere.
So how do you balance this, this desire to lower rates with the desire that Dorothy expressed to maintain some incentives? It seems like you can't have it all, but at the same time, if you just get rid of everything, that could have some market implications. So kind of just go through and just kind of talk about how you balance that. Would you like to start?
Sure. I mean, I think ultimately they're going to have to decide how much they're going to lower rates and how much they're going to set aside for incentives, tax expenditures of some sort. And then they're going to have to divvy them up, ideally based on what's going to be the most benefit to society. In practice, it'll probably be as much on politics as that. But you'd need to effectively come up with a budget and divvy it up.
I think we need to step back and realize the effective tax rate that most corporations are paying right now is far lower than, obviously, the rates on the books. So when we think about what is our goal, I would think about where do we want to take this country down over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And there's a much more effective way to use the tax dollars that we have more effectively, but I don't necessarily think that the trade-off between reducing the tax rate and getting rid of credits is the right dynamic. I would think of what are our goals, how do we best get there, and that's the right question.
Okay. Like a lot of people, I imagine, I went back and reread Showdown at Gucci Gulch up to this, and when you look at this and you look back at that, whether it was Treasury or Ways and Means or Finance, each time they'd started and went down the path and then kept adding it back in provisions and everything else, and both had to retreat, or all three had to retreat and go big. And that's what I think is that what we need to be doing here is trying to go big and trying to be aggressive in trying to make these changes while recognizing, and it's something that's important that Jonathan brought up, is that this is the revenue. I mean, we have to generate the revenue to fund our government. I mean, this is both through the individual and the corporate tax codes, major sources of revenue, the major sources of revenue, and so that has to be balanced in there as well. And something that Senator Stabenow said earlier is, yeah, we've got a $16.5 trillion debt. We've been running more than $1 trillion in deficits this year. It's going to be about $850 billion, so yay. But we've got to deal with those issues in the overall context as well.
I think, the NAM certainly is a strong supporter of tax reform and has been for a long time. And among our top goals are a lower corporate tax rate, a strong capital cost recovery system, and a strong and permanent R&D credit. And I think those things together are very important and could help the energy industry. We fully recognize that base broadening or a broader income base is part of the deal, but we want to make sure that you don't broaden the base and increase the tax burden on manufacturers and make it more expensive. We need a very positive capital cost recovery system to encourage the investment, not only in the energy resources, but in manufacturing in general. And I think that's, you know, as we go into this debate, we really need to be very careful as to what we eliminate and how we broaden the base, because if it's done incorrectly, it could have a very damaging effect on the economic. And in the end, our goals are jobs, competitiveness, and broader economic growth, and I think that's probably shared by everyone on the panel.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I mean, so tax reform, thank you.
Apple pie, too.
Yeah. So tax reform is going to be about going big, as Steve said. And the problem here is that going big is really hard, and it's not going to happen until 2015, if Kevin's right. But there are things that have to happen in the energy space this year. We need to extend the production tax credit. And there are things that could happen this year and that should happen this year. We need to provide long-term certainty to the wind industry. We need to extend master limited partnership treatment to renewables. We need to pass a carbon tax. And it's important not to focus too much on tax reform, because we can do those things outside of comprehensive tax reform. A lot of them, now a carbon tax is big, but a lot of those other things are relatively small in the grand scheme of the American tax code and should be done this year and not in 2015.
I think to have a reasonable debate about this, you should think about how people make investments in the financial space. They usually set aside a portfolio of investments where they define their risk categories. And you usually anchor that portfolio with some relatively conservative investments, and you save some shoot-the-moon dollars for the big hopes that might pay off big, but maybe don't have to. And it's hard to imagine the system we have today as the one we would have created if we'd started with the goal of encouraging energy security and environmental performance. But given that it is the system we have today, we want to be careful about grouping things in our portfolio that are different. Regular tax treatment, expenditures are not the same thing as subsidies. I think both need to be there, but we should try to measure them out and understand what they're for and why we're doing it in a proper portfolio strategy that looks at that anchor of solid returns and creates also some opportunity for shoot the moon or Apollo project risks.
Richard brings up carbon tax. I'm going to send it back down this way with the carbon tax idea. It's obviously a big revenue raiser. Political prospects seemingly pretty dim, but let's talk about it and just kind of throw it out there. They're not really kicking it back and forth too much in the House and Senate, but going back this way, carbon taxes, go.
I've testified twice that I love it, but every economist does that, and no one who ever runs for office will ever do that. The other reason I testified that I loved it is that it seemed more workable than a cap-and-trade system that wouldn't work. Well, now there's no cap-and-trade system, the carbon tax doesn't look as good to many of its proponents, economists not included. And so what do? We have $70 billion a year at $10 per metric ton. Capitol Hill doesn't ignore that. I think we'll see it again. I think the short, brutal political life of the carbon tax is temporarily over, but look for a reincarnation when it's time to make money come in.
When is that reincarnation, Richard?
It happens when comprehensive tax reform happens. If we're going to seriously think about lowering the tax rate for the corporate income tax, we need to come up with a lot of money somewhere else, and the carbon tax is the natural, logical place to do that.
I think I'll change the tune right now. The NAM earlier this year actually did a study on the carbon tax. And I should back up a little and say manufacturers have a huge interest in energy. We use 30% of the nation's energy, so this is a huge issue for us. And when we took a look at a carbon tax, we modeled two, a $20 a ton tax and an 80% reduction in greenhouse emissions. And in both cases, the benefits of a carbon tax were far outweighed by the negative impact on the economy. The impact on jobs, on investment, on consumers, on energy prices, obviously. And in fact, when you look at the revenue that the revenue lost from the decreased economic, the hit to the economy by a carbon tax, the revenue, when that is offset by the revenue generated by the carbon tax, you actually generate very little revenue. And our models used it for rate reduction and deficit reduction, and there was very little impact. But the impact on the economy in terms of lost wages, reduced consumption, lower production, were really quite dramatic. So just wanted to throw that in too.
Swinging the other way.
Right in the middle here.
Yes, exactly. Certainly, we're curious about a carbon tax. I mean, we think that it has that amazing revenue generation potential. It could certainly reduce the rates for, it has the other external benefits potentially on greenhouse gases. And so from our perspective, yeah, it's something that should be part of the debate in a comprehensive tax reform package, where you are eliminating other breaks and you're reducing the overall rate. And so from that perspective, we're certainly very interested in it and would like to see it be part of the mix. We supported in our package, our letter to the Ways and Means Committee in their recent panels. And then just one little thing is that we disagree, though, is the idea of extending the master limited partnerships to renewables. We'd rather excise that whole structure, think that it's been kind of, it's grown exponentially, and it's a concern to us. So it seems like in that case, we're just adding more complexity and more giveaways in there.
From the advanced energy economy's perspective, we're looking at the current energy system and seeing huge transformation, whether it's distributed generation or demand-side controls on energy efficiency or EV technologies or the potential for battery storage and utility grid storage. The energy system, particularly on the electricity side, that we've known for the last 100 years is radically changing. I'm not sure what it's going to look like in 10 years, but it's going to look different than it has over the last century. The disruptive array of new technologies, it's really exciting, but that creates a whole lot of market uncertainty. And to the extent that we could reduce that market uncertainty, it's going to have more predictability for investors. We need to deal with a whole range of risks, and while AEE doesn't have a specific position on a carbon tax, that's one of those risks that needs to be incorporated. If you're going to, as an insurance company's perspective, whether you're a climate skeptic or a climate believer, it's a risk you've got to deal with. And the uncertainty of not knowing how this country is going to deal with carbon when you're making decisions that are going to be for investments of billions of dollars for decades ahead, that creates a lot of, hinders the industry.
Okay. I mean, we feel that a carbon tax probably makes sense. Why tax something you want to encourage, like income or wages, as opposed to taxing something like pollution you don't want to encourage? Also, as Malcolm said, we do a lot of work in the utility industry, and there's a lot of uncertainty. Do you invest in a coal plant? What's the future cost going to be? You don't know. If we can figure out what it's going to be so people can make their decisions, that would be good. That said, I don't see it happening in the near term. It might be part of the end game when people discover, ooh, we haven't cut enough, we don't have rates as low as we want, and they're willing to think big, if you will. But I don't see it happening until a possible end game strategy.
With Senator Baucus's announcement yesterday that he's going to retire, we're looking at the potential of Senate Finance Committee Chairman Ron Wyden. He's kind of somebody who's found himself at the intersection of energy and tax policy in recent years, and so I just am curious what a Wyden chairmanship looks like, and what you think, you might think that means for energy policy. And who wants to start?
I guess I'll do it. I'm not sure if this is also new. I haven't really looked at it. I mean, obviously, Senator Wyden's been on the Finance Committee for a while. He cares about renewables. He cares about efficiency. He's done a lot of stuff with biomass. He's been working with the senators from the Gulf and looking at revenue sharing. So it'll be very interesting, but I haven't really thought it through fully.
It will be interesting, but I'm much more focused on the next 2 years. We've got an we haven't looked at the tax code since 1986. There is a whole host of new challenges that this country and global opportunities out there. I think with the current focus on overall comprehensive energy tax reform, the energy sector really has an opportunity to make what's in there work better and more effectively. And the political dynamic seems to be lining up, with Baucus being focused on it, with Camp being focused on it. I think there's a real opportunity to move us forward, and I hope that we don't miss this opportunity and are just resigned till 2015 or some later date.
I would just say that certainly we wanted to see engaged Chairman Baucus in these next 2 years, and it may free him from some of those political bonds, but by the same token, it also means that people know they can wait him out. He's not going to be there. He doesn't have as much to promise in the out years. But what I would say about Senator Wyden is, I mean, he did Wyden-Craig. He's got Wyden-Coates. I mean, he has been a tax reformer. That's how he's approached it. And going back to '86, I mean, it was an Oregonian in charge of the Senate Finance Committee that actually got the tax reform bill through. Senator Packwood.
Are you from Oregon?
I'm not.
I think, I go back to one of to previous comments that, we're focused on the here and now. I mean, we are in the middle of or at the beginning of a tax reform debate that I think is going to be very important. And, I think I laid out what our overall some of our top goals are. But I think one thing that I'd like to raise too is our concerns that there'll be like a piecemeal dismantling of the tax code. Certainly the energy tax increases that come up repeatedly as offsets for all types of things are one of the a case in point. And I think to some previous comments, calling these things subsidies where, intangible drilling costs, despite the name, are really ordinary necessary business expenses. And, in another context, businesses would expect and indeed should be deducting them. And so when they come under attack, that's really disturbing, and I think it creates uncertainty in the energy area. We want to continue the investments that have been so good and so beneficial to the economy. We need more of those kinds of things. At the end of the day, what we're looking for is a reliable, diverse, and affordable sources of energy, and you need capital investment to do that. So,
Dorothy, do you want to answer on the Wyden question now? Any thoughts on?
I think we'll wait and see. I'm focused on the here and now.
Richard, on Wyden?
I think it's a little bit early to be thinking about Chairman Wyden, just like it's early to be thinking about Chairwoman Landrieu and the Energy Committee, but that could happen at some point. It is exciting to think about still having somebody who would be a strong believer in dealing with climate change in Senator Wyden, and that would be a critical addition to the Finance Committee or continuation of Baucus's commitment.
Chairman Wyden, let's stick to that for.
Well, he's chairman of the Energy Committee today, and there's 3 natural gas hearings in the next month, forums, events. I would be more focused on that, but if you have to ask what's the difference is that the last 2 chairs, including Chairman Baucus of the Finance Committee, have brought a package of conventional and alternative fuel preferences where they've been able to exert some significant influence. What Chairman Wyden is telling us today is that he likes geothermal and hydroelectric power. He also has a deep affection for biomass. I think that it'd be an interesting question to see what fossil fuel preferences he would bring to the committee.
Let's just move, I think it's 1 floor up on the Dirksen building to the Energy Committee and the domino effect that happens, and talk about Chairman Landrieu, assuming she wins re-election in November of 2014. She steps in, then we'll have had 3 chairs of the Energy Committee, pretty rapid succession with Bingham and Wyden and Landrieu. Talk to us a little bit about what a Landrieu Energy Committee could be like, and we'll go down the road here.
We're several lifts from the president now, Darren.
I know, but this is Politico. That's what we do.
Well, so the 2 traditions that you've seen in the Energy Committee that Chairman Wyden seems to be continuing are the moving towards sort of a cooperation across party lines and an inclusiveness in terms of fuels. The bills they write tend to get broader as everybody contributes, and they all favor everything by the time they're done. I think it's safe to say that whether it would be Chairman Landrieu or Chairman Cantwell, both of them would have to stretch a little further, probably, to get to that inclusiveness. But at least in the case of Landrieu, it wouldn't be a question of having to explain the importance of oil for the very first time.
The most important energy policy question we face is not bipartisanship and it's not inclusiveness. It's dealing with climate change. And I would be very concerned about Senator Landrieu's commitment to dealing with climate change. I think she'll talk about it, but her willingness to include all fuels would be a serious challenge to dealing with that problem.
Would you rather have a Chairman Cantwell?
I don't know.
I think NAM supports an all-of-the-above energy strategy, and I think certainly Chairman Landrieu with a broad exposure that she's had to different sources of energy, I think that would be a positive thing for us.
I just point out, just looking at the political realities as well, I mean, that does depend on, 1, the Democrats retaining the Senate, 2, Senator Landrieu being reelected. And I'm not saying she's not going to be or anything else, but I'm just flagging that as we get further and further into this sort of prediction, it gets a little bit, or my crystal ball gets a little bit more hazy.
I keep coming back to the same question, which is, how do we more effectively reach our goals? And I don't know that it actually matters from a macro perspective who sits in that chairman's seat. I think there's an awful lot of amazing technological development that is driving energy policy. The shale gas revolution over the last few years has flipped everything on its head. And that's while there wasn't a committee chairmanship. So I'm much more focused on how do we remove barriers to getting those advanced energies into the marketplace. And I think we can get a bipartisan consensus to do that.
Right. I guess I'm feeling that we should really focus more on the here and now. I mean, the Energy Committee, there's a Shaheen-Portman energy efficiency bill. Senator Murkowski just said some good things about it yesterday. We're concentrating more on what can happen in this Congress rather than a future Congress. I guess the one other thing I'd say about Senator Landrieu, if she becomes the chair, is she has often worked with Senator Murkowski, so I suspect them to be quite a team.
And we have a little over 10 minutes left, and we got a question in from Twitter, so we encourage those to continue coming in if, as time winds down here. But this question is, asking, where is the potential common ground on energy issues? We've talked about a lot of differences on carbon taxes, on whether there should be incentives at all for tax incentives at all for energy. Where can you guys agree? And we'll start with you and go down this way.
Right. Not to take some of Malcolm's thunder, but I agree that we need to have certain, agree on certain principles that, and we comply them uniformly. So one I throw out there is we want to really try to transform markets, promote advanced technologies and not business as usual. So we need to think whether it's efficiency, renewables, oil, gas, nuclear. What are those advanced things that we're trying to promote that are not business as usual, and how do we give them a little kick shove for a period of time before we move on and phase them out?
I see agreement in several places. First, I think there's widespread agreement that there's an important federal role in the energy sector. We want affordable, secure, clean power. We recognize that between the high capital costs, the externalities that aren't included, the disincentives that utilities have as regulated to actually innovate and invest, that a federal role is needed. And I think that's across the board. Certainly not universal, but I think there's a broad agreement on that. Then the question becomes, how should that federal role be harnessed? And I think if we focus on what's the market-based objective, what's the government role, when you figure out that objective, automatically sunset the provision when you reach that objective. And then do it in a way where you're focusing on problem solving, not picking technological fixes. A CAFE standard to promote fuel economy to get off foreign oil as opposed to mandating Priuses. I think from the conversations I've had with folks, there seems to be widespread consensus on those points.
Just sort of extrapolating a little bit from that is this idea of pay for performance. That, I mean, essentially, are we achieving our goals that we're trying to do with the tax code? Because these are, whatever the preferences are, they are a subsidy. It's some sort of deviation from the underlying rule that is intended to try to promote a behavior that wouldn't otherwise occur. And so we need to be constantly reevaluating the code and whether we're actually getting the bang for our buck. I mean, it's been one of our concerns about tax subsidies writ large has been that they don't get reevaluated like an actual spending subsidy does every single time, every single year with the appropriations. And so that's why we would like to see very limited tax preferences. But I think that everybody could agree that we should be making sure that we're getting that bang for our buck, that the loss of revenue is actually generating the activity that we're trying to do.
I think where we can reach general agreement is on developing a climate that encourages investment. I mean, we need investments in energy efficiency. We need investments in new and alternative sources of energy. We need investments in clean energy, advanced manufacturing technology. I think we all agree that the investments and the development of the shale natural gas, the shale oil in the United States has been a game changer, not only for manufacturers but for the broader economy. And we need to build on that and really create secure, reliable, and affordable sources of energy in the United States. That's what's going to make us competitive, and that's what's going to make us a leader in the world, global economy.
And I think that the best thing that we could do with the tax code to make it drive those investments is to provide some sort of medium to long-term certainty for all of the tax incentives that are in there. We need not just de facto phase-outs like we had with VTEC, but we need actual legislated phase-outs if that's what we want to do, and we need to provide some sort of certainty so that people know where our tax code is going.
Well, I think that the two things you want to encourage are energy security and cleaner performance of the energy that we have. I think everyone agrees with that, and even the Congress was able to pull off a bill in 2005 with the Title 17 program. I know that's not an exemplar of government success at this point, but those two principles are embedded in it. What I think is also should be widely recognized, I fear it may not be as widely recognized as it should be, is that you're not going to get more clean, affordable energy by raising taxes on the sources that are affordable and clean. You cannot change the code in a way that materially shifts the cost structure for the existing players without a response. This is a dynamic system, and it will have a response. And so it's perhaps more important to ask, what are we really spending the money on right now? I think it's getting pretty clean and pretty cheap, and we might not want to stop when we're headed the right direction.
I think we're getting close to the 9 o'clock hour, so Mr. Nadel, I think you have another obligation. Let me ask you this question. I'll ask you. You can answer it, and then we'll come back this way, going down the row. We're into year 5 of the Obama administration, 3 years to go. So, sort of talk about the footprint that the administration has put on tax policy and energy policy here, coming up to this point. And just really quickly, I mean, how much influence do you think they're going to have as we look to sort of the final 3 years? We think about the midterm elections and his ultimate lame duck status. How much do you think that he can leave in terms of a fingerprint on the tax policies for energy?
I think he can still have a fair amount of influence. People are talking about tax reform, whether it happens next year or the following year. He's still going to be around for quite a while. He has to sign the bill. He'll be able to do much. He does the budget. So I think particularly for the next, I'll call it 2 years, he'll still have quite a bit of influence towards the end, less so, except he can still do administratively whatever the existing law allows. And past history is, whether you're talking President Bush or President Clinton, there's all sorts of things that are done right up to the very last day.
Okay. Thanks so much for your insights. If you have to leave, feel free to step up. Let's start back here with Kevin on the Obama administration fingerprint. They can leave.
Will you make me leave after what I say? Well, look, the Obama administration is the de facto leader of energy policy right now because of the gridlock in Congress. If Congress can actually get unlocked and do tax reform, then Congress can probably get unlocked and do a lot of things. One area of consensus where we think Congress can get unlocked is in energy efficiency, and we'll see. In terms of how the president's role will be defined, he will have a decisive opportunity to set the priorities for the discussion of energy tax policy. If he wants it to be all about cleaner and cheaper, he has to make his voice heard, and I believe his voice will be influential, yes.
The president's voice is always influential. Clearly, they're focused really on executive authorities right now and where they actually have the say on what happens. But they set the stage and set the agenda in tax reform in many ways. That's how the production tax credit got extended last time, was the president's insistence, along with some other folks. But he had a big role in his insisting that happen and get included in extenders. So.
I think, again, just building on your comments, I think the administration's support for tax reform, that's something that we're very encouraged by. But what discourages us is that every conversation about tax reform seems to also be accompanied by tax increases on the energy industry. And if we want to have a broad discussion on base broadening and things like that, starting the conversation with these what we feel are targeted tax increases on one industry sector, which could be damaging, and we feel that they're mischaracterized as subsidies, doesn't really bode well for the long-term discussion.
I would agree that the president, the White House has to go all in this strategy. And if you look at their most recent budget, they had a bunch of eliminating a bunch of tax expenditures on oil and gas, and then they had a whole bunch of renewable credits and other things that they were adding in, almost that balanced out. At the same time, they were calling for revenue-neutral corporate tax reform. And so, it's like talking out of 3 sides of their mouth. And so, I think that they need to really double down. And then again, not to harp back to '86 too much, but I mean, really, what kicked that all off was Treasury Secretary Reagan, his first proposal on tax reform that then eventually helped move that ball forward. And so the White House, it has to become much more engaged and actually leading Congress and working with Ways and Means and Finance.
I think the White House has been remarkably engaged and actually has a pretty amazing track record already on this stuff. If you look at what's happened over the last 5 years, so what's happened on Obama's watch. Oil imports are down below 50%, for low as they've been for many, many decades. More wind was deployed last year in terms of new generation than any other. Electricity prices have come down. Greenhouse gas emissions are at a 19-year low. There's a remarkable number of things, new investments that the Obama administration has made. They've clearly been a leader in championing these issues, and I think that's going to continue for the next 3 years.
Let me just check on time. The clock here says we're about to run out, but do we have 10 more minutes? Or we do have 10 more minutes, okay. All right, well then we have more.
Well, then I guess I would like to get some predictions in terms of, will tax reform actually happen in this Congress? We've talked a lot about kind of the issues that surround it, but is that actually going to happen in this Congress?
I wouldn't bet my mortgage on tax reform happening in this Congress, but one thing I actually feel much more confident about is that the decisions that are ultimately going to become law, whether it's this Congress or a future Congress, are going to be made in this Congress. That particularly on energy tax reform, this isn't driving overall comprehensive tax reform. There's macro issues, structural issues that the nation's dealing with. When we can finally deal with those issues, they're going to pull the energy tax reform section off the shelf, and that's what's going to move. And I think there's a real unique opportunity now to get that right. If we can send the right market signals, if we can find a way to do it in a technology-neutral way that'll advance the ball, advance market certainty, all of that's just going to make it all easier for that energy package to be put into whatever vehicle ultimately moves.
Well, I mean, I've been in Taxpayers for Common Sense for 13 years, and believe me, to do my job, you have to be an optimist. And so, I mean, I'm really, I do think, though, that it's going to be a lot more. I'm optimistic, but realistically, I think that it's going to be exactly how you outlined. That we're going to be basically revealing a lot of the debate, a lot of the policy, the arguments will be out there, hashed out. Issues like a carbon tax or other things will get vetted in the public arena, and that when there is the will to get comprehensive tax reform, because I agree that it's not going to be just energy tax reform in any way. It's going to have to be across the board. It's also going to have to be individual and corporate to really to accomplish this. And so I think that a lot of the initial battles and the sort of intellectual fights will be hashed out in these coming years, which will certainly be part of whatever comprehensive tax reform eventually gets enacted.
I agree with you. I think, again, my focus is on the here and now. I think there is a very serious debate on tax reform going on in Congress. I think Chairman Camp, Chairman Baucus are very committed to it. And I think it's very important to pay attention to what's going on, to be part of the debate, because even if it doesn't happen this year or even next year or in 2015, some of the things that are discussed, some of the issues that are resolved, or some of the ideas that come out of this will eventually make it into law. And I think, certainly Chairman Camp, his commitment is setting up these 11 working groups. One, in fact, was on solely on energy tax increases, and one on manufacturing, and we'll closely relate those two issues. I mean, this is a very positive sign, and I think it's very important to pay close attention to the debate, because I think even if it doesn't end up in a comprehensive bill this year, pieces that are talked about now will eventually make it into legislation.
Yeah, I think Congress is in a stage right now of figuring out what levers they have to pull and what the implications of pulling those levers are and how they all interact with each other. That's what the 11 working groups are doing in the Ways and Means Committee. It's important for energy professionals and advocates to weigh in on that and help Congress understand what those levers do and what they should be doing. At the same time, we need to be focused a little bit on the here and now and not just put all our energy into 2015, if Kevin's right again, but to really, again, really digging in on that. I think, but at the same time, we have things that need to happen this year. We need to extend the production tax credit. We need to get serious about the fossil fuel subsidies. So let's not lose focus on that, but stay a little bit engaged in the broader tax reform conversation.
Well, I think small piecemeal things can move. In the stopgap bills that come up in response to crises, annual funding obligations, I think it's safe to say that the wind industry will probably not ignore the fact that the deadline has been redefined, but the fact that the deadline still comes at the end of 2014 means that they may be interested in finding some alternative framework for encouraging wind development. And I would be very shocked if Congress didn't have something to say about it before the end of 2014.
We've got the Senate Finance White Paper on energy coming out, I think, tomorrow. What's the most important thing to see in that? And also, I mean, if you look at what the Joint Committee on Taxation is producing, that responds to the comments that came in from to the Energy and Commerce Committee, I guess let's just go down the road here, what's like the most important thing you want to see in those two papers?
Well, Darren, there's two things we're interested in. The first is the mnemonic that's going to be used to evaluate what you cut. We're working with the default premise that the biggest line items and the fastest growers will jump off the page. But if they have a defining principle that they set out as the way in which they're going to proceed, that's extremely useful. We're also intrigued by the black box that is the scoring that is assigned to the different proposals. Some scores have been radically upsized in the most recent Joint Committee on Taxation estimate for fossil fuel tax treatment. It'd be interesting to see whether there's going to be discussion of that and maybe an expansion of where they got those numbers.
Most important things to see?
A commitment to fighting climate change, I think. That we don't just need to continue energy policy as we've done it, but we need to be careful about what we're incentivizing going forward.
I think ours, again, goes back to what kind of climate they have for investment, because we really feel that's key to our long-term energy security. And also, you know, we would be on the lookout for what we believe are discriminatory taxes, both on the energy industry and something broader, for example, like the carbon tax, which really could be devastating to the manufacturing sector in the United States. And we would be very concerned about any discussion of that.
I think it is going to be a few more tea leaves, and that will be able to ascertain a little bit more of their soul, their tax reform soul, and what they're looking at. It won't be the whole picture, but we'll be sifting through it to see that. And I think it will be a lens into seeing whether they really want to go big and talk about big issues, or whether they're going to play small ball and talk about various smaller tax expenditures and proposals.
To the extent that we have a national energy policy in this country, it's probably codified in the tax code. So what I'm looking for is kind of a signal on whether they're willing to take the patchwork that has developed over 100 years and try to put it together into a rational framework. Is there a way that they can take, you know, the status quo right now, from my perspective, is a huge missed opportunity. You know, folks focus on the wind industry, but already the ITC for solar in 2016, large concentrating solar projects can't go forward. The planning cycle is too big. Offshore wind projects can't go forward. The next generation of technologies are not supported because of the instability in today's investment climate. So I'm looking for signals that the tax committees are willing to go big and start thinking in a more holistic way of how do we create that investment climate for the long-term technologies that we're looking for.
Well, we're almost out of time now, but we ended the last panel with a quick talk on extenders, and felt like maybe that's a good place to end here. A fair amount of skepticism I heard from some of you on the prospects of getting tax reform this Congress, much less this year. So when we get to December, are we going to be in another extenders fight?
I hope we're not.
Yeah.
I hope that we've been able to get past that. I think if we are, the wind industry is, the projections are, you know, huge drop off from last year to this year. And it's not that the wind has stopped blowing. It's that the investment decisions can't be made. And it's already happening on solar. It's happening on lots of other technologies. If we keep doing this start and stop kind of unprincipled approach, it would be a missed opportunity, but I wouldn't be all that surprised.
I've called the tax extenders the cockroaches of the tax policy environment, and the fact that they always seem to survive. You know, they caught a ride on the bailout, they caught a ride on the tax extensions in 2010, and then they survived on the fiscal cliff deal. So it doesn't seem very wise to bet against them, although we would like to see them really thoroughly vetted and a lot of them actually eliminated or made permanent. The idea of having this sort of gimmicky every couple of years extension doesn't make sense to us.
And actually, I think I agree with you in part that we need to take a look and see what works and what doesn't work and make them permanent, make the ones that are effective permanent. In the meantime, though, we're very concerned about this piecemeal type approach to doing it now, like doing it half now or outside of tax reform, because I think it's better to maintain the status quo and you've got a solid base to develop a new tax system for the United States. So we would definitely support extending, as we have certainly, you know, Steve, Stephen, in the past.
I think everybody agrees that doing extenders every year is an unfortunate and unproductive way of doing tax policy, but it's how we do it, and we're going to do it again this year. And it's not going to be all that much fun for everybody, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, I'm with the cockroaches. Extenders are definitely something to look to, but I think the size and composition of them, they'll probably be leaner. It might be, it's not, unlike the cicadas, it might be a lean year for the cockroaches.
That's a great way to end this conversation.
Exactly.
It's time to wrap up. Panelists, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this morning. Thanks again to our sponsor, the American Petroleum Institute, for making this conversation possible. Thanks to everyone who's watching on the live stream. And everyone who came out today, please grab a Knish on the way out the door and have a great day. And we'll see you at the next Politico Pro conversation.